Dog attacks toddler for days. When parents learn the truth, they fall to their knees. The unmistakable sound of a toddler hitting hardwood floor is something no parent ever forgets. It's a heavy, sickening thud that seems to echo through every wall, followed by that terrible split second of absolute silence before the inevitable scream pierces the air. Sophie dropped the wooden spoon she'd been using to stir the morning oatmeal. The pot bubbled and hissed on the stove, forgotten in an instant as she bolted from the kitchen, her heart already racing with that primal parental fear. Her husband David was thundering down the carpeted staircase, his dress shirt half-buttoned, reading glasses still perched on his nose, his face twisted with alarm. There, in the center of their cream-colored living room rug, lay 3-year-old Oliver. The little boy was sprawled on his back like a fallen star, his cherubic face crumpling into that unique expression of shock and betrayal that only toddlers can truly master. His small chest heaved as he prepared to unleash a wail. But what stopped both parents in their tracks was the sight looming over him. Max, their 4-year-old golden retriever, stood planted above Oliver like a statue. The dog's chest was heaving with agitation, his mouth slightly open, tongue lolling. He wasn't nuzzling the boy in concern or backing away in shame. Instead, he let out a low, insistent bark that sounded less like remorse and more like urgency. "Max, bad dog!" David shouted, rushing forward to scoop Oliver into his arms. The toddler was hysterical now, clutching his left elbow, his face flushed crimson and slick with tears and sweat. "He did it again, David," Sophie said, her voice shaking with a volatile mixture of fear and rising anger. "I saw the whole thing from the doorway. Oliver was just walking toward his truck, and Max deliberately body-checked him. He knocked him down on purpose." David glared down at the golden retriever. Max didn't cower the way guilty dogs usually do. He didn't tuck his tail between his legs or offer that sheepish, squinty-eyed expression dogs give when they know they've crossed a line. Instead, he stood his ground with an almost defiant posture. His warm brown eyes locked with laser-like intensity on the crying child. His black nose twitched rapidly, visibly sniffing the air around Oliver's tear-streaked face, as if searching for something invisible. "That's the 4th time this week," David said grimly, bouncing Oliver on his hip in that automatic soothing motion parents develop. "He's becoming aggressive, Sophie. He weighs nearly 90 pounds. He could seriously hurt Oliver, break his arm or worse." "I think he's jealous," Sophie whispered, reaching up to stroke Oliver's damp blonde curls. "Ever since Oliver started walking confidently last month, Max has been different. He blocks doorways, he herds him into corners, and now this, actually knocking him down. It's like he's trying to establish dominance." They both turned to study the dog. Max had always been the soul of gentleness, a living teddy bear who'd let Oliver pull his ears and climb on his back without so much as a grumble. But lately, the dog had transformed into a bundle of nerves. He paced the house at odd hours, he whined for no apparent reason. Most disturbingly, he'd developed an obsessive fixation with Oliver's face, pinning the toddler down with his paws and licking the boy's mouth with frantic, desperate swipes of his tongue that made Oliver scream and thrash. "We need to separate them," David said, his jaw set. "I won't tolerate a dog that attacks my son in his own home." He reached down and grabbed Max's collar firmly. For the first time since they'd brought him home as a wiggling 8-week-old puppy, Max growled at David. It wasn't a vicious snarl, but a deep, rumbling protest that seemed to vibrate through his entire body. The dog dug his claws into the carpet, refusing to budge, his eyes darting back to Oliver with that same unsettling intensity. David had to physically drag all 90 pounds of resistant golden retriever across the living room, through the kitchen, and out the sliding glass door to the backyard. When he pushed Max outside and locked the door, the dog didn't trot off to explore or lift his leg against the fence. Instead, he immediately pressed his wet nose against the glass, fogging it with his breath, staring at Oliver with eyes that seemed to burn with desperation. The oppressive July heat made everything worse. The air conditioning struggled to keep pace with the temperature, and everyone in the house was on edge, irritable and sweaty. Oliver was unusually fussy throughout the day, which Sophie attributed to the trauma of being knocked down. He clung to her leg like a barnacle, crying over things that normally wouldn't bother him. He gulped down cup after cup of apple juice, draining his sippy cup and immediately asking for more, but turned his nose up at lunch, refusing even his favorite mac and cheese. "He's just shaken up from this morning," Sophie told her mother during a phone call that afternoon, watching Oliver listlessly push a yellow toy truck back and forth across the hardwood floor. "Max really scared him. I think we're going to have to, find him a new home." The words felt like broken glass in her mouth. Max had been their first baby, the one they doted on for a year before Oliver arrived. But the image of the dog deliberately slamming into her son played on repeat in her mind. By evening, the tension in the house was suffocating. They decided to confine Max to the laundry room overnight to ensure everyone could sleep safely. Oliver was put to bed early, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the day. Sophie and David collapsed onto the sofa, the silence of the house pressing down on them like a weight. "Maybe we should try a professional trainer first," David suggested half-heartedly. "Maybe it's some kind of resource guarding behavior." "He doesn't guard food or toys," Sophie sighed, massaging her temples where a stress headache was blooming. "He guards Oliver, but he's guarding Oliver from Oliver himself. It makes no sense." Around 2 in the morning, the howling began. It wasn't barking, it was a mournful, high-pitched baying that echoed through the air vents, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "You've gotta be kidding me," David groaned, rolling over in bed. "Just ignore it," Sophie mumbled into her pillow. "If we respond, we're teaching him that making noise gets him what he wants." The howling stopped after about 10 minutes, replaced by a rhythmic, heavy thumping sound. Thump, thump, thump. "He's throwing himself against the door," David said, sitting up in the darkness. "He's going to destroy the doorframe or hurt himself." "I'll handle it," Sophie said, swinging her legs out of bed. She needed water anyway. She made her way downstairs, the thumping growing louder and more frantic with each step. It sounded desperate, panicked. When she opened the laundry room door, prepared to firmly scold him, Max didn't wait for permission. He exploded past her like a golden missile, nearly sending her sprawling into the washing machine. "Max!" she hissed urgently. But the dog didn't head for the back door to go outside. He didn't veer toward the kitchen and his water bowl. He scrambled up the staircase, his claws scrabbling and sliding on the polished wood, losing purchase and recovering in his frantic haste. A cold prickle of unease rippled down Sophie's spine. Something felt wrong. She followed him up the stairs. By the time she reached the second-floor landing, Max had already pushed into Oliver's room. They'd left the door slightly ajar so they could hear the toddler if he called out during the night. When Sophie entered the nursery, the scene before her turned her blood to ice. Oliver lay in his crib, tangled in his light cotton blanket decorated with elephants. Max was standing on his hind legs, his front paws hooked over the white wooden rail. He was whining, not barking, but making a high-pitched, keening sound, and nudging Oliver's small shoulder hard with his nose. "Max, get down!" Sophie whispered harshly, rushing forward. "You're going to wake him." She grabbed the dog's collar to pull him away. Max turned his head toward her, and in the pale moonlight filtering through the blinds, she could see the whites of his eyes. He barked once, a single, deafening blast directly in her face, then immediately turned back to Oliver, licking the sleeping child's face with desperate, frantic swipes.
David appeared in the doorway, gripping a baseball bat, his eyes wild with alarm. What's happening? He broke out. Sophie struggled with the powerful dog. He's attacking Oliver in the crib. Help me.
David dropped the bat and lunged forward. Together, they hauled Max backward, but the dog fought them with a strength they'd never experienced before. He snapped at the air, thrashed violently, scrambled with all four legs trying to get back to the crib. He was making a sound Sophie had never heard any dog make, a screaming, garbled yelp that sounded almost human. They managed to drag him into the hallway and slam the nursery door shut. David leaned his back against it, breathing hard, while Max threw himself against the wood from the other side, scratching and snarling. "That's it," David panted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "That is absolutely it. He goes to the boarding kennel first thing tomorrow morning. I don't care what it costs. He's completely lost his mind." Sophie was trembling, her hands shaking. "At least Oliver slept through it all," she said. "He must be exhausted. He didn't even wake up with all that noise." She walked back to the crib to check on their son and maybe adjust his blanket. Oliver was lying on his back, one small arm flung out to the side. His pajamas were completely soaked through with sweat. "God, it's so hot in here," Sophie whispered. She reached out to brush the damp hair from his forehead. Her hand stopped mid-air. Oliver's skin was cold. Not cool, not room temperature. Ice cold. The sweat on his hairline was clammy and wrong. "Oliver?" she whispered. He didn't move. Usually at her touch, he would shift position, sigh softly, or curl toward her warmth. This time, nothing. He was dead weight. "Oliver!" Her voice pitched upward into panic. She shook his shoulder. His head lolled to the side, his jaw slack, his lips slightly parted. "David!" she choked out. "David! He's not waking up!" David abandoned his post at the door. Max immediately resumed his desperate scratching and rushed to the crib. He scooped Oliver up. The toddler was completely limp, his little body heavy and unresponsive like a rag doll. "Oliver! Hey, buddy, wake up!" David tapped the boy's cheek lightly. Nothing. No flutter of eyelids, no groan of protest, not even a twitch. "Call 911, David yelled, his voice cracking with terror. "Sophie, call 911 right now." The next 15 minutes dissolved into a nightmare of chaos. The operator's calm voice in Sophie's ear, the wail of approaching sirens, the flashing red lights painting the nursery walls in rotating patterns of emergency. Through it all, the scratching at the bedroom door never stopped. Max was still trying to get in. When the paramedics burst into the room, they found David on the floor performing rescue breaths, tears streaming down his face, while Oliver remained gray and still in his arms. "He was fine earlier," Sophie sobbed to the lead EMT, a compact woman with kind eyes and an ID badge that read Martinez. "He was playing today. He was just tired. He had a fall this morning, maybe a concussion?" Martinez worked with swift efficiency, checking pulses, lifting eyelids, attaching monitors. She leaned close to Oliver's face and sniffed. She paused, her expression changing. "Did your son drink anything unusual tonight? Juice, soda, anything sweet?" "He had juice," Sophie stammered. "He was so thirsty all day. He drank 4 or 5 sippy cups." Martinez pricked Oliver's heel with a lancet. A glucose meter beeped. She looked at the reading, and her eyes widened. "I need glucagon stat," she shouted to her partner. "We have a severe hypoglycemic event. Blood sugar is 28. He's in a diabetic coma." "Diabetic?" David stared at her, stunned. "He's 3 years old. He doesn't have diabetes." "Type 1 diabetes can strike at any age," Martinez said, already injecting a syringe into Oliver's tiny thigh. His pancreas stopped producing insulin, probably recently. His body couldn't process the sugar he was drinking, so it flushed everything out through excessive urination. He became dehydrated, and then his blood sugar crashed critically during the night. If you hadn't found him right now. She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. The ambulance ride was a blur of beeping machines, urgent voices, and desperate prayers. It wasn't until nearly 4 hours later, when Oliver was stable with IVs in both arms and color slowly returning to his cheeks in the pediatric ICU, that Dr. Chen came in to speak with them. The doctor sat down, reviewing the chart with a serious expression. "You are remarkably fortunate parents," she said quietly. "It's extremely rare to catch a first-time type 1 onset during the night. Usually we find these children in the morning, and often," she paused, "there's a term called dead-in-bed syndrome. The blood sugar drop is silent, no coughing, no crying. They simply slip away in their sleep." She looked directly at Sophie and David. "What woke you up? You said Oliver was completely silent." Sophie froze. She exchanged a long look with David. The memories of the past week suddenly reassembled themselves in her mind like puzzle pieces clicking into place, forming a horrifying new picture. The dog knocking Oliver down when the boy was weak and unsteady. The dog blocking his path when Oliver was dizzy and unstable. The obsessive face licking, smelling his breath. The sweet chemical scent of ketones. The metallic smell of a body in metabolic crisis. "Our dog," David whispered, his voice barely audible. "Our dog woke us up. He broke down the door." Dr. Chen nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I've heard of that phenomenon. Diabetic alert service dogs are specifically trained, at enormous expense, to detect glycemic changes. They can smell the chemical shifts in breath and sweat minutes, sometimes hours before a seizure or coma occurs. But an untrained family pet?" She shook her head in wonder. "That's pure instinct. That's pack behavior at its most primal." Sophie felt hot tears sliding down her face, one after another, unstoppable. "He was knocking him down," she sobbed. "We thought he was attacking Oliver. We thought he'd turned aggressive. But he was trying to wake him up, trying to stop him from moving when he was unstable. When blood sugar drops dangerously low, you experience severe dizziness and loss of coordination," Dr. Chen explained gently. "Your dog probably sensed Oliver becoming unstable and tried to ground him, keep him safe. And the licking, he was checking the scent, trying to provoke a response, trying to make sure Oliver was still alert. We locked him outside," David said, his voice hollow with guilt. "He stood at the glass door, staring at Oliver. He knew something was desperately wrong, and we punished him for trying to save our son." When they finally returned home 3 days later, Oliver was still weak but stable, now wearing a continuous glucose monitor attached to his small arm like a badge of survival. The house was quiet when they walked through the front door. David had asked their neighbor to check on Max and feed him, but the neighbor reported that the dog had been withdrawn, refusing to eat. Sophie found Max lying motionless on Oliver's playmat in the living room. He didn't jump up in greeting. He didn't wag his tail or bark with joy. He simply lifted his head, his eyes sad and wary, clearly expecting punishment. Sophie dropped to her knees on the floor, ignoring the pain in her legs and the bone-deep exhaustion. She opened her arms wide. "Max!" The dog hesitated, uncertain. Then, slowly, he crawled forward on his belly, submissive and unsure, dragging himself across the rug toward her. "I'm so sorry," Sophie wept, burying her face in his golden fur. "I'm so sorry, sweet boy. You were trying to tell us. You were trying to save him, and we didn't listen. We didn't understand." David walked in, carrying Oliver, who was drowsy but awake. He sat down on the floor beside Sophie. Gently, he placed Oliver on the rug between them. "It's okay, buddy," David told Max, his voice thick with emotion. "Go ahead, check him." Max looked at David, then at Oliver. Slowly, tentatively, his tail gave a small wag. He leaned forward and very gently, very delicately, sniffed Oliver's mouth. He held the position for several long seconds, his nose processing information invisible to human senses. Then he pulled back,
let out a long, heavy sigh of relief and carefully laid his chin across Oliver's legs. His eyes slowly closed. For the first time in weeks, the vigilance was gone. The anxiety had lifted. The scent was right. The danger had passed. His pack was safe. That night, they didn't close the nursery door. They placed a large dog bed directly next to Oliver's crib, complete with Max's favorite blanket. But Max didn't use the bed. When Sophie checked the baby monitor at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep herself, she saw the soft glow of the nightlight illuminating the room. Oliver was fast asleep, peaceful and safe. And there, lying on the hardwood floor, pressed directly against the bars of the crib, his nose resting between the white slats just inches from the boy's face, was Max. The glucose monitor was silent. The numbers were stable. But the guardian remained on duty, as he would every night for years to come. The dog who'd been called aggressive. The dog they'd almost given away. The dog who'd saved their son's life. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with anyone who loves dogs or needs a reminder that sometimes our pets understand things we can't see. Thank you for watching, and give your furry friends an extra hug today. They might be heroes in ways we'll never fully understand.